Hello, you guys. It's Morales again. This is 33.4 Legacies of Imperialism, the last section. We'll get it done in time, I hope. Here we go. Objectives. Understand changes, dealing with imperialism, understand the tie between racism and imperialism, and understand the efforts by indigenous groups to resist imperialism. Emphasis on the last one in particular because that's a big thing that shows up because often kids just view it, oh, the Europeans came and the people laid over. That's not the situation. Your book doesn't do a great job of emphasizing these things, but tons and tons of resistance movement, so we'll get to those in a moment and give you some examples. Alright, economic legacy of imperialism. So the whole thing was about economics, how to get more wealth. Remember that Europe started to industrialize, they need raw products, they need raw stuff, so their factories, they find them in third world countries and across the world. So Africa, South India, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, Americas, all produce raw materials to go back to the European factories to be made into products and to be sold abroad. I'll reinforce the idea that early on it was sold that these colonies would be places for raw materials and also purchasers of finished products. Well, they do produce the raw materials, but they don't really purchase tons of the finished products. So we got colonized states encouraged to exploit natural resources. So when they go into places, they, for example, into Africa, they do find sources of certain minerals and other items that are not being utilized. For example, tin was not really being utilized too much in Africa. It's found there, and then it's shipped to Europe. So they could get it really cheap, produce it into something, and then sell it back to across the world. Okay, mainly to Europe and to parts of East Asia to be sold to work to something. Okay, this type of imperialism encouraged a dependency on imperial powers. Pretty soon those groups started to, instead of grow things for themselves for subsistence, they started to grow things to be sold abroad. And so we have this shift where these economies become dependent. And remember, we had a Miss question not too long ago where these countries or areas became dependent upon imperialist or the European powers to purchase their stuff, and without that they wouldn't be able to produce or survive from that. So one classic example is Indian cotton. Cotton was grown in India for a long time, back to the Indus River civilization, but not in the amount that the Europeans are going to want or the British are going to want, and pretty soon cotton becomes the #1 product coming out of India. So that's one example. And then they also introduced new products, new crops to be grown in these areas, and the classic example is tea. Tea coming from China, that's where it originally comes from, is grown and harvested for a long time. Well, China's not even producing enough tea, and so hey, all the tea in China, well, it's not enough. So they start to grow it in India and Ceylon. Ceylon's an island, Sri Lanka, off the coast. So there's a massive transformation in what's going on. This is an ecological change, which is one of the 5 themes of the AP history, how have people changed their environment. Well, here's an example. They didn't grow tea in Ceylon, and now Ceylon, it's pretty much all they do is grow tea in that area. All right, moving forward. Okay, this map, take some time to take a look at it, because you'll see, okay, for example, here's Europe, okay, and here's the people moving from Europe into the Americas, into Hawaii, into South America, or South Africa, and into Australia. So take a look at where people are coming from and where they're going to. You'll see most Europeans come to the Americas, and we'll have a stat on that, but they're coming to civilized places. One of the selling points for imperialism as to why they should do it was that it'll help set up colonies abroad to other places. Okay, well, most of the people from Europe didn't come to colonies of the European powers, but rather they went to already independent states like the United States, like Argentina, where they started to do their own thing and live. Okay, African changes. Okay, so people moving from over here no longer as slaves. Okay, but moving as workers to the sugar plantations in the Caribbean, in South America, and some of them moving to smaller islands like over here. I can't remember the name of the island. It's Seychelles and stuff like that, where they're going to grow cotton stuff. It's not cotton, but sugar. And then over here from Africa into Saudi Arabia, where they're going to be there's going to be a lot of shift in there to go into sugar. And then India. India provided a ton of labor going abroad because they had such a massive population. So from India, you'll see these people come into the Caribbean, growing cotton, doing that type of plantation work. From India, going to the Pacific Islands to grow sugar and stuff like that. From India to Hawaii. And then we have also, don't forget, China is going to start to, especially after the Opium Wars, they're going to start to send out some of their population. Before they were banned from going, and now they're going to be paying because the Europeans are forcing it, and they're going to be going from China to places like Southeast Asia to be a workforce, from China to places like South Africa to be working in all sorts of fields, in particular mining and farming, from China to Hawaii. Okay, and if you've been to Hawaii, you'll see that there's a huge contingent of Japanese and Chinese groups of people in those areas, and they all go there. Hawaii becomes this kind of cosmopolitan place with all sorts of different groups of people working there, doing lots of stuff. So take some time to see this, because one of the things that they might ask is discuss or explain the migration patterns that have developed in the 1800s and 1900s. In fact, it was on a previous AP test from 2 years ago. So we'll hopefully take a look at that in one day in class. All right, the labor migrations, just to kind of give you something to write down. European movement from temperate to temperate lands. Temperate is the not so hot, not so cold. It's the United States. Okay? Yeah, I know there's parts that get really cold, but this is the one they're talking about. Okay? It's not super boiling hot in a tropical location, which is a different situation. Okay? Most of these people come as free cultivators. In other words, they came over here hoping to farm and stuff like that. Early on, they do start to farm and find lands in that area, but they're going to quickly shift into, when America starts to industrialize, into factory work. So during the time 1800 and 1914, 32 million, I think that number's kind of low, 32 million Europeans come to the Americas. We talked about that before, early from the northwestern part of Europe, the England, the Ireland, the Germany, okay, and then later on from the southeastern portion, from the Italy, Austria, Slavic nations, and Russia. Okay, so those are different groups of people coming to America, and when you get to American history, you'll hear about that stuff because there's some resentment for the other groups of people. And then the other population is Africans, Asians, and Pacific Islanders moving about to tropical or subtropical locations, essentially warmer areas, and that's a different type of work. That's the plantation farms, those are sugar plantations, coffee, tobacco. Those are kind of, I mean, it's not that the industrial workers are have an easy life, but this is terrible work type of stuff. And many of these people came as indentured servants because they couldn't afford the passage. The deal was sign a contract to work for anywhere from 3 to 5, 7 years. We'll pay your way, and then you get a small stipend, or you get a small compensation. Not get paid very much, but you have to promise to work there for a while. Okay, it's kind of like slavery, but a little bit better off. And at the end of your time served, you have a chance to get another contract extension, or not. Okay, but then you could go do your own thing. But remember, the pay rate in the area is very low, so you might move to something else, or you might hope that you perhaps moved up in the area. And so for these people, it's 2.5 million moving between 1820 and 1914, and some of them moving just within the subtropical zone. Alright, as far as colonial conflicts, once again, I'm trying to emphasize that I anticipate hearing or seeing something about this, because all too often kids just get the impression that the Europeans came and the other groups just kind of gave in. Well, that's not the case. It wasn't the case in America. The Native Americans fought off the Western settlers for a long time, and then ultimately to no avail because of the superior technology and the fact that the numbers of Europeans settlers just overwhelmed the Native Americans. So thousands of insurrections. Insurrection is a rebellion that you don't like. So when there's an insurrection going on, it means that your country is being attacked by these people who are rebels. In that country, it's most likely a revolution. Those people are heroes. We think insurrection bad, revolution's good. So keep that in mind. So these are insurrections. The European powers have come and colonized the area, taken it over, and now the natives are getting restless. Okay, so that's a famous expression. Okay, maybe they just want their independence. So a couple of examples. The Tanganyika, and I have no idea if I'm saying it, is part of the Maji Rebellion, which takes place in Tanzania. And these people are the people who start to organize under a prophet, kind of a Holy Spirit man, who organizes these people and says, you know, these Germans are bad people, and this is on the east coast of Africa, and they start to organize themselves into kind of a revolution of sorts. Okay. they essentially sprinkle themselves with magic water, and they're not dumb, but they need to do something, and they think the magic water will protect them of bullets. Please don't be insensitive to this guy. This is a thinking, they don't have much other option. It's very similar to what happened with the ghost dance in the United States, which I think was mentioned in your book, and you can look up later. Anyways, they're ultimately unsuccessful because the Germans early on don't think them as a threat, but they do start to do some damage, and then the Germans go, oh my gosh, and they go in their full force to put down the rebellion. Another example is the New Zealand. It's the Maori Wars. When the Europeans go in there, or the British go in there, they make the tribes sign treaties. Well, the problem is the Maoris have never been unified. Okay, they have connection because they're all related, but they're not a tribe of organized people of one Maori people. They're a whole bunch of tribes, and these guys have been fighting for a long time. So the Maori Wars, the British signed contracts with one group, but that doesn't mean that those other groups honor that one, except for the fact the British think it is. So when they show them a contract, hey, this guy signed it, they go, well, that guy's not even part of our group. What do we care? So there's a long series of brawls between the Maori and the New Zealand, not the Maori and the British in New Zealand, and eventually the British kind of eventually the Maori are pushed into part of the island, almost like reservation system, and the British European settlers take over the rest of the island. During that time, the Maori go, hey, this is our chance, we need to unify, and they start to put together a coalition of tribes to select a king, and they do select a king. Their thinking was, look, if we show that we're unified, we can present ourselves with a king, and that king will negotiate with the British to hopefully get the British out of there. Probably not going to happen, but to at least keep what we can of the island to ourselves. Eventually, the Maori King movement is kind of done away with because the Maori groups can't really see eye to eye. The ones that do organize don't have strong control over the other ones, and the other ones, because they have independence, go, well, we don't like that deal, we'll make a better deal with the British, and the British are able to kind of keep them disunited and eventually dominate them. And then the Maori, for themselves, live on the island, but in the not so nice parts in the interland, up in the hills where it's kind of rainy. The coastland is where it's at, where it says they have some plains and farming area. Okay, imperialism and racism. So this is a big kick. These things are very much tied together. During the 1840s or 1860, I think it was. I can't remember when Darwin. I think he's 1860. He proposes his theory of evolution. Okay. Well, the idea of racism had been around for a long time, and now it develops into what we call social Darwinism, which I should have put a PowerPoint here, but I noticed I didn't, so I'll stop. Alright, and so back to this one, I just put this in here, social Darwinism, and that's misspelled. Okay, now we got it. So scientific racism is this theory that people are taking a look at, in your book there's a picture of the skulls, which are misrepresentation because they take an anomaly, okay, and use that. But hey, who's to stop these people with their theories when you provide them with facts? Anyways, social Darwinism, based on the theory the strong will survive. It's based on Darwin's research or ideas that those who are most fit for survival will survive, and those that aren't will perish and be gone from the planet. Well, the people start to apply it to society, but Darwin's very much against it because Darwin says this applies in nature with animals who operate on instinct and not with humans who have free choice. So he's very much opposed to it. He's very upset, and he gives a blistering speech one time about these people who have hijacked his theory and used his name in it. Okay. Anyways, it's not going to stop the people from using it as a justification for imperializing. Why are we doing this? Well, because these people can't control their own land. They're incapable. What's the proof? We're in control, and they're not. Goumanu is one of the guys that proposes this idea, and he combines the theory of Charles Darwin with the doctrine of social Darwinism, and this is the theory that I'm saying. Okay, it's used for justification. Why are the Europeans doing it? Because they have to, because the other groups are incapable, and therefore someone needs to take the lead. This coincides with what Cecil Rhodes says. Remember, we are the best race in the world, and therefore the more we occupy, the better off the world's going to be. So at this time, it's acceptable. Okay, today it's very much frowned upon because it's just not nice, it's not right, and it's not it's not scientifically accurate. Finally, we have anti-colonial movements in India, and this one's going to come into play later on. Ram Mohan Roy is the guy that starts to put this together. He starts to advocate that India should be independent. the British are having lots of trouble with these groups of dissension, and some reform movements is given. Okay, and so the British, to release some of this tension, allow them to set up certain groups to express their views. They don't have a lot of power, but at least they represent the Indian people, and they kind of give a chance to talk to the British government about what's going on. Okay, they're influenced by the Enlightenment thoughts, and then they tend to set the pattern that these are people trained in Europe with Enlightenment thoughts, and they come back. This ends up being the Indian National Congress.